Okay, so some of you may have already read most of the Dharma talk. I posted it online, but I am going to expand it a bit today. We're in a situation where many people are asking about Buddhism's response to events such as the invasion of Ukraine and the defense of Ukraine by its people. And so I wanted to give my Buddhist response. Obviously, I don't speak for all Buddhists, but I do have a knowledge of what the sutras teach and some experience in interpreting them. So this is my response. Buddhists are non-violent. This is an axiom so common that it's become a cliche. All well and good in the normal world, but how would a Buddhist in Ukraine respond when the Russian tanks come in? They must, not may or should, they must fight to maintain the freedom and security of their country and the lives of the people of their country. But they must do it without hatred toward the Russian soldiers or the Russian people. They must do it in the spirit of compassion for their fellow Ukrainians and compassion for the Russians they are fighting. As Buddhists, we have not been given commandments from an all-powerful God like members of some religions. No God has told us, you shall not kill. By the way, there are no outs on that one. It is, you shall not kill. Instead, we have the testimony of thousands of years of teachers and practitioners that when we bring harm on others, we cause harm to ourselves as well. This is not because there's some universal force, whether you call that karma or God, that is monitoring our actions and paying us back in kind, but because we are interconnected parts of the whole that we call the universe. Except for those with the brain dysfunction called sociopathy, we all feel bad when we bring harm to another. This is part of what humanity means. Ukrainians will feel this regret, this sickness inside. Maybe not immediately, but eventually. And the Russian soldiers will as well. Even if they fully accept the need to fight and to kill, they will still be burdened by these feelings. For the Buddhist, what we don't want is to add to the suffering of these feelings, the suffering of hatred and anger as well. We are called on to take upon ourselves the suffering brought about by violent acts when we defend the less able, when we defend our country, when we defend ourselves. But we are called on to make this defense without the added burden of hatred and anger. Thich Nhat Hanh, who lived within the violence of the Vietnam War, said, if you see someone who is trying to shoot, to destroy, you have to do your best to prevent him or her from doing so. You must. But you must do it out of your compassion, your willingness to protect, and not out of anger. That is the key point. If you need to use force, you have to use it. But you have to make sure that you act out of compassion and a willingness to protect, not out of anger. Like much that Thay has said, I would say this is a wonderful statement of the Buddhist view. The Buddhist is also called on to be honest in their evaluation of the situation and the appropriate actions required. And here I'm going to deviate from my script and point out that there are decided limits that Buddhists have often crossed. In Myanmar, they take this idea of defense and applied it to Buddhism as a whole and committed violent acts against the Rohingya refugees, Muslim, who had moved into Myanmar, for the simple act of allowing people to convert to Islam. And they argued that this was an attack on Buddhism and therefore must be met by violent resistance. That, my friends, is bullshit. That is taking violence that you want to commit and trying to find a justification within your religious tradition to allow you to do it with a free conscience. Buddhism is about facing yourself and the world with truth. In this case, this invasion is an action of Putin and the majority of his oligarchs that make up his base of support, not an action of the Russian people. There is no blame to be attached to Russians in general, and actions against it should be rooted in a focused response against those who bear responsibility as much as possible. Even when taking actions directly against Putin and those who support him, though, they should also be done without hatred or anger. It is easy in the moment to react with violence heightened by hatred and anger. It is much more difficult to respond with the appropriate physical actions, which may indeed include violence, without the emotional weight of hatred and anger. But this is what we're called on to practice as Buddhists. In these days, we support the people of Ukraine, but do not hate the people of Russia. Send arms that the Ukrainians can defend their lands and people, but also send humanitarian aid to alleviate suffering, both among Ukrainians and Russians. Be ready to accept the consequences of supporting Ukraine: higher gas prices and wheat prices, inaccessibility of certain goods, etc., without harboring hatred toward any. May we all live the words of the great teacher Shantideva. May I be a guard for those who need protection, a guide for those on the path, a boat, a raft, a bridge for those who wish to cross the flood. May I be a lamp in the darkness, a resting place for the weary, a healing medicine for all who are sick, a vase of plenty, a tree of miracles. And for the boundless multitude of living beings, may I bring sustenance and awakening, enduring like the earth and the sky until all beings are freed from sorrow and all are awakened. Swara.
Good morning, Sensei. Good morning, everyone.
Hey, Jenny.
Hi. I have a box of tissues, and I've cried throughout what you're saying. As bodhisattvas, how when we're in that level of protection, and we would have to throw that first punch, would the humanity and the kindness and peace and compassion that we we lead with as Buddhists, would there be like a mama bear instinct to come out to protect? Or, you know, when you throw a punch at someone, the force, it seems, that comes from your shoulder comes in anger. And I don't know how you would throw a punch without, because we're taught that that's it, and it's innate in us that a punch comes with anger. And I guess, you know, the thing that I'm proud that we would protect, and that all of the ancestors have had to protect. But in that place when we're bodhisattvas and we come with peace, do we start by maybe asking, you know, I'm standing in front of a Russian and I'm a Ukrainian Buddhist. Do I say, brother or sister, put the gun down? I mean, this is very hard, and I know it's very hard for all of us to see what's going on and not be able to do something. And we're taught compassion. So I guess my question is, you know, the bodhisattva punch, where would that come from then when we're taught non-anger and hatred?
That's a really good question. And I think we also have to look at the kind of the way that violence and violent action is taught between the West and the East. And I'm going to actually ask Joe to speak to it a bit more because he has experience with martial arts. But if we look at the Eastern response, and remember that most Eastern martial arts grew out of Buddhist teaching. And one of the things that they all have in common is removing hatred from the action, acting appropriately without including your emotional response of hatred to that. Joe, would you agree? Or
yeah, I would agree. I think it is a difficult question, and almost universally in the martial arts, it's violence is a last resort, right? Like when all else fails and you must defend yourself, then you defend yourself. There's no, and I think one of the ways that's beautiful about, especially martial arts, is they turn violence into almost a dance, right? It takes the emotion out of it. All your movements are based on muscle memory. You're just reacting as opposed to being on the offensive. That's not the case with all martial arts, but most of them. And so even when you're being, I guess, brutal about it, there's almost an emotionlessness to it. You're moving in the ways that you were taught to eliminate a threat. And then when it's done, it's done. Like when I was teaching martial arts, that was one of the hardest things that you had to teach the young ones when we would spar, is that once the match is over, it's over. Like if you lost, that's fine. Like, but you don't hold a grudge, which is a difficult thing to do. And I think that's kind of what Glenn was getting at, is that, you know, this Ukraine and Russia thing, the Ukrainians are defending themselves as a last resort. Russia's the aggressor. But then when this whole thing is finished, it's done. Like you leave the hatred, the resentment, those kinds of things. And that is going to be a very difficult thing for Ukrainians to do if they can. But I would say like the thought is that you do what needs to be done and then you let it go, right? Just like in most Buddhism, like that letting go piece at the end is often the hardest, but it's the one that's the most necessary to preserve both yourself and the other from getting lost to violence.
yeah, thank you, Joe. And I contrast that to the general way that in the West we tend to whip up toward violence. We foster hatred, we foster anger. We talk about how inhuman the other side is so that we can remove that humanity from them and feel anger and feel justified in feeling that anger. And that's where the big difference to me between the Eastern philosophies toward violence and the Western generally lie is in that approach of anger. We use it as a motivating factor in the West. And the Buddhist response is, well, we need to remove that motivating factor so that our violence is doing what is necessary, but not reacting from a place of anger and hatred that we probably honestly don't even feel really to begin with. It's been whipped up in us to feel that way. The amount of hatred I'm hearing toward, among some Russian people in general, but definitely toward Putin and the oligarchs, this is hatred that's been whipped up by propaganda. It's not a hatred that is innate in most of the people spouting this hatred. Because honestly, if you were to ask any of them a while back, 6 months ago, what do you think of Putin and the ruling elite of Russia?
They don't.
There'd be no response. We don't think of them. To get us to think of them, we had to whip up hatred and anger. And so, Jenny, thanks for your question, because it is a very, very important one. And I think that the way you stated it kind of expresses that Western view that violence always comes from anger. No, it doesn't. It doesn't have to. We've been taught that it does because that's where most military action in the West comes from. And that's because we whip it up ourselves.
Thank you so much for that. Pete is trained in Okinawa karate, and I practice. I stand on a leg and then I kick. Some kind of learning. Usually that is in my kick is toward someone, and I have to work on that. But it was really helpful when Joe said muscle memory and training to act in that natural way where the anger and the hatred comes out of it. It just becomes innate muscle memory, bodhisattva, learning how to act in front of an aggressor instead of acting with hatred. So I really, really appreciate.
There is no first strike.
Yeah, and Pete's here, and he said in the karate that he has practiced forever. There is no first strike, is what they say. So thank you for that. I feel so much better now.
Thanks, Jenny.
I would like to bring up what is probably not a completely Buddhist response,
I
but
have my hand up as well.
when
Just so you guys know.
January,
Just letting you guys know that are in person. I do have my hand up whenever you're finished. I would like to speak.
oh, I apologize, you go ahead.
Thanks,
No,
Carl.
that's fine. Go ahead. I just figured you guys couldn't see the screen, so go right ahead.
That when January 6th happened, I was very angry, and I was angry at all of the people who participated. And with time and space, I'm no longer angry at a lot of the people who participated. I actually feel compassion for them. But I am still angry at Trump and at the people who knowingly spread falsehoods, because I feel there's a degree of responsibility, and the people who committed a lot of the acts were actually fed lies, and that makes me feel compassion for them. At a distance, I don't know how well I would do face-to-face talking with one of them, but so maybe with more distance, I will develop more compassion for the other actors. But
And that's a good point. And Kara, I'll jump to you in just a second, but I don't want it to sound like I'm saying that a Buddhist should never feel anger. We've talked about this in the past. Anger can sometimes be a very useful emotion. It's destructive when it leads to harm. But anger can be an emotion that leads us to compassion. It can be an emotion that leads us to helping other people change, helping society change. So anger can be a perfectly acceptable emotion, but it is never acceptable when anger leads directly to violence and to physical harm. That's when the Buddhist has to draw the separating line. So it's fine to feel anger. I feel anger at Putin and the oligarchs, but that's not leading me to commit acts of violence. So there is a difference there. Kara, go ahead.
Thanks so much. And also, I didn't mean to interrupt whoever was speaking. Sorry, I just kind of wanted to make sure you guys saw that. So 3 points kind of popped up for me, so I'll try to make them quick because I know we're low on time. One was a memory of my own humanity. I lived a long time ago, lived with a couple girls. One was just really nasty to me. And when she moved out one day, she broke a lamp my mom gave me, and we never have had a lot of money, right? So it really struck me, and I was so upset and went to, I was young, I was going to fight her, right? Like, I'm going to come punch you or something, right? I get to where she's at. I'm realizing like, it's not really what I want to do, and I'm kind of arguing with her. And then someone steps in front of her, and then she kind of soccer punches me in the eye around him, right? So I fall backwards, and and I had a friend with me, and everyone's just kind of like, get her, go at it. And instead, I don't like violence. I've never been a violent person. And instead, I just started crying and asking her, like, kind of talking to her about like her humanity, my humanity, you know what I mean? Telling her this isn't what I want to do. And so it became a very big turning point in my life, because it put a lot of like, what is it? I guess like shame. And then, that feeling of like kind of worthlessness, because like I got punched and she didn't, and I didn't, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
So that's just a point of humanity, I guess, that I've noticed about myself. Another point is my dad was in Vietnam, and I think it's important to remember, and he just newly got sober and just told me all these things. And it was really powerful. He was in a meeting sharing, an A meeting sharing that, that we need to remember that, well, he was talking like a soldier, right? So he was like, and we went into this one spot and these enemies, and just really hits for me. And so he said, I don't even know why I call them enemies, because they're just people like us, It was just so beautiful. So it's sorry. So I'll repeat that he said, I don't know why I call them enemies, because they're just people like us, thinking they're doing the right thing. And at the time he thought he did the right thing, right? And we find out that was just this horrible massacre of people. I think it's really important to remember that soldiers are brainwashed. Especially, I can't even imagine the soldiers in Russia, what they go through, as we do know a lot about their culture. So I can really feel compassion for the soldiers. And the third point was, I'm glad you brought that up, because about anger, because my thought about that was just remembering too that anger is usually a blanket emotion for fear. And and so I'm glad you said that I also feel anger can be beneficial, I've been actually dealing with a lot of anger myself, and I think it's been really repressed. I can feel it rising right from my solar plexus, and just this this rage that comes out, and at times it scares me. But I feel like our society too has this repression of anger, that like it's not a good emotion to feel, and it's, and I do believe you want to be careful with it. But I've been questioning that a lot, because I've not been a committed Buddhist for a long time. I've had ideals and principles and thoughts about it in my head for a long time, since I was young. But so that's something I've been grappling with, kind of turning that part of me off, like the anger or the solar plexus, or so that's all I kind of wanted to bring up. And the fact that I have had thoughts of, I'll just say Trump, because that's such a name of hatred, now. And I mean, I've had some angry moments and thoughts about him, and I've literally wished that he were dead, and wished that, just so we could like remove that energy, I guess, from our leadership. But then I've also had meditations picturing him as like a young boy and wondering how he was raised. And then actually like imagining myself like hugging him, which is so, I don't know, hard, I guess, to think about, because a lot of that stuff that he gets into, the things we know him about, how he treats women, it just totally bothers me, So it's all really hard. And those are just 3 points that that really passionately came up for me that I wanted to share with you guys. So thank you for listening.
Thanks, Karen. Thank you very much, and especially for mentioning that. I think one of our difficulties, not just in the West, but just as humans, is that we have taken this attitude toward anger that it has to be repressed and it has to be pushed down, and it's a bad thing. Therefore, it must be. We can't admit to being angry. And one of the things that the depth psychologists, Freud, even though I'm not a Freudian, Jung and others, told us for years, and that if we go back to the Buddha, what the Buddha was telling us is that if you repress these things, if you just press them down, eventually it's going to be like a spring. You're going to press it down to a certain point that it can't be pressed any further, and then it's going to explode. Instead, deal with it honestly. Deal with the root causes of your anger. Approach the cause and then see what you can do about that cause, if anything. There are some things that we can't do anything about. But the great teaching of Buddhism is the same as the great teaching of AA. Help me learn the difference between the things that I can do something about, and if I can do something about, give me the courage to do it, and the wisdom to know when I can't do something about it and to accept it as simply the reality of the world. But to do that with anger, we have to get to the root cause of anger. And we can't do that if we simply press it down. That's where I have a lot of trouble with many Buddhist and pseudo-Buddhist teachers who want us to just feel peace and joy all the time. Full bloody shit. There are times that you cannot feel peace and joy, that you're going to feel sadness, that you're going to feel anger. Take those times to learn, where is your anger coming from? Where is your sadness coming from? And can you do anything about it? If so, then get off your cushion and do it. If not, then just sit with it and allow it to be there. So thank you. That point of our kind of Western view of pressing anger down is something that really needs to be dealt with on a whole other level.
Thank you for explaining that, because yeah, I've been really having a hard time with that. And I feel like, you know, there's also this level of like toxic, I hate that word toxic, but I dislike, sorry. But you know, like toxic positivity, like, right? I try not to say the word hate. So it's kind of confusing, but sure, I'll find clarity.
Hi, this is Pud. I'm a social worker, and I've experienced violence largely in my work. And one of the things that I somehow learned is how to talk people down when they're about to hit me or hit somebody else. And I'm very grateful that I learned that, because I've used it throughout my life to help minimize violence that could have occurred. It's the last time I was wondering about being violent towards someone was in the short north. People come and take boxes off the front porch from, you know, Amazon and stuff. And we caught this guy who was taking boxes off the porch of some of our neighbors and was taking them in the backyard of the other neighbor and opening the boxes, and then just taking whatever the property was, stuffing it in a carrier bag and running. Well, I looked at this guy, we saw this guy for a second, and I thought, well, he's no bigger than I am, but I did not tackle him because I don't know how to fight, thinking that he would hurt me. I think it's time there really are instructions about even old ladies learning how to protect themselves. And I think I should do that partly for my own security, and partly because it is incumbent upon us to intervene when we can to lessen violence in the world. I pass.
Thanks, Bud. Joe?
I lost what I was going. I'm gonna try and recreate it. So maybe I stand a little bit different. I personally think that anger is 99.9% of the time bad, right? And where I don't necessarily think that it needs to be repressed, I think maybe the appropriate response to anger is to transform it, right? So that, because anger can lead us to some really dark places. It's rooted in all the Buddhist bad things for the Four Noble Truths, right? Desire, attachment, repulsion. Anger allows us to act in ways that we would otherwise not. And so when it presents itself, it's usually because you want something to be other than how it is, and you are trying to decide if you want to create the circumstances to change it in a less than peaceful manner. But if you realize you're angry, you can look at the root causes in real time. And then maybe apply the antidote, which is, usually compassion, right? Which is a more helpful emotion and always a more appropriate one than anger. And so, whereas there is a place for anger, I think that when it arises, it's never, 99.9% of the time, it's never good. maybe not 99 point, because there are times when, like, when you're in situations of abuse or aggression where I can see anger being the appropriate response to getting yourself out of that situation. But most of the times we get angry, it's because somebody has done something that we don't think they should have done, and now we're angry about it. And we use that as our anger as an excuse to treat them in ways we wouldn't otherwise normally treat them. And that's problematic. And so, well, I'm not saying it needs to be repressed, like pushed down, like, oh, don't feel the anger. I do think that a good Buddhist practice would be, when it arises, either transform it or let it go. Because it's not helpful in 90, we'll go with 87% of situations. Anger is not a beneficial emotion.
I am so appreciating this conversation. I'm a psychologist and I work with people who have been traumatized almost every day in my work. And often what a big part of the work is rage, and allowing people to have their rage, allowing people to fight, scream, yell, threaten to kill and murder their abusers, their attackers, their rapists. Not like you said, Joe, not to have the anger as an end in itself, but for it to be transformative. Because it is the people, it's the folks who can fight their way out of a really bad situation, like the Ukrainians, for example. If you can flee, that's great. That's the best case scenario. But if you can't flee, or if you have to fight, it's the people who can fight their way out and bring all of their resources to bear, including their anger. They are the ones who don't get traumatized. So if you can fight or flee, that's a better case scenario, with fleeing being the best, of course, if you can. But I really want to validate and support Glenn and Joe and everybody speaking to the value of anger. I wonder about anger as a form of skillful means, anger as transformative, anger as even healing and curative. I wonder sometimes about the explosions of anger that can be curative of depression. I wonder about the uses of anger for relieving anxiety, and creating a space not for just its knowing it, but in the case of trauma, where it's become locked in the body, where there has to be this kind of blind, irrational explosion of anger that has to happen somewhere. And if it can be done in therapy, that's of course great. It's very hard to do that on a cushion, and even meditating with trauma is often not the thing to do. Sitting too long on a cushion if you've been traumatized is not a good idea. So we need to have some way to integrate mindfulness into it in order to digest it. But meditation is not always the cure, that's for sure. Bringing in a little bit is fine in measured ways. But I really want to, this does get, I'll admit, to an issue I've had with Buddhism also, that I think you talked to, Glenn, which is this being too quick to say that we should never be angry. Saying that one outburst of anger could put us in one of the hell realms for however many hundreds of thousands of kalpas, a kind of taboo against anger. And I'm glad you're speaking to this. I'm glad you're validating it. And I want to make a little more space for anger. So I think anger can be curative and lead to this place of compassion if it's given enough space, enough love, enough care. I just wanted to take it further though to trauma, because when we are traumatized, often we have to allow ourselves to live out that anger somehow. It's super important. And I think anybody who's really been traumatized can probably understand that. Anyway, I'm appreciating the discussion. And I want to keep validating both the compassion, but also the anger.
Thanks, Dorian. Yeah, and even though it sounds like it at first, I don't think Joe and Dorian are talking at cross purposes. I think they're talking to a common purpose of examining your anger, using it where it's appropriate, transforming it where it can be, and where there is no other option, sitting with it and letting it go. But I think the first step is finding the root of that anger. I think what we find in many cases, and the reason I would tend to agree with your wildly gyrating percentages, is that
Hey, I think 30% speaks for
I think that many times the anger that we feel is not actual anger at the situation that we're in right now. It's the fact that that situation created the final click of that spring that just popped back. And we have to realize, the only way to realize that is to look at the root of the anger and say, did somebody stealing my place in line really cause that outburst of rage? Or was it all these other things that have been going on for the last week that I've been repressing? And that was just the final straw. The phrase, the straw that broke the camel's back, is a very real phrase. We can take a lot, but we can't take everything. And eventually, the lightest little thing may release that spring. So yeah, I would agree with both of you that anger is not a bad thing. And I think that Buddhism has been horribly wrong in teaching this anger must be gotten rid of. Anger must be examined and then let go, either by using it, transforming it, or letting it go. But we can only do that by examining it, not by reacting to it.
Glenn, this is Jerry.
Hey, Jerry.
Really appreciative of the discussions this morning. And just the other day, I was reminded that so often our reactions in the moment are based in our history. So reinforcing the straw that breaks the camel's back is much that way, where this one final act leads us to a more severe reaction than we normally would have. So thank you all for the thoughts raising this issue and the various perspectives that have been presented. Thank you.
Thanks, Jerry.
I know that we're going to be wrapping up here soon, but I just want to be completely transparent in this moment. This whole conversation makes me angry. This whole situation with Ukraine makes me angry for multiple reasons. And I know the root has to do with my feelings of I can't do anything about it. And it's just another example of my ineptitude when it comes to solving problems that are much bigger than me. The things I can do about it, I already put in action, the way I give service to the Sangha or to the interfaith community in general, and definitely supporting Ukrainian charities where I can currently. But the anger for Putin and the oligarchs, the anger for Western nations putting Ukraine in the crosshairs on a political stage for this whole situation in NATO, anger for media conglomerates that are pushing this narrative of the small guy versus the big guy, when the same thing has been happening in Israel and Palestine, the same thing has been happening with China and the Uyghurs, the same thing has been happening in nations all over Africa. Upset at, well, anger for having this conversation and this song cause today, when we're all sitting here and talking about people and their rights to emotions, or how they should deal with emotions, or how emotions can be transformative, when people are literally being displaced right now, people are literally being killed right now, and they've done nothing to warrant that, other than someone just wants to take their homeland. So there's so much anger that I have in this moment. I felt it was necessary to be transparent about that, because yes, there is some alleviation of giving it breath, giving it life, and then it leaves you. And also, I'm a firm believer that, you know, compassion is a virtue, but in times of battle, a golden statue won't do. You know, you have to pick up a sword. So, you know, I'm not going to give anybody grief for feeling they have to defend what they believe in, whether it's, you know, their loved ones, their homeland, their customs. But there's so many ways that I feel anger about this whole situation. And I do know the root. I've definitely sat with this prior to having this conversation today. But yeah, it's so much bigger than all of us. And I wish there was more we could do other than the dialogue and the analysis and the charts that show this bomb got dropped here and the charities that are asking for this donation here. I wish there was so much more we could do as a collective people, and seeing how this has progressed to this situation, like on a political stage, when we've all just had our backs to the whole situation and going about, you know, our Starbucks and macchiato days. So yeah, it's all very frustrating, and it's all very, very angering.
Yeah. Thank you, Geneva. And I definitely see that. And actually, one of the reasons I wanted to do this teaching was to validate those feelings and to remove that stigma that we sometimes feel as Buddhists of, well, I'm not being a good Buddhist because I'm not teaching peace. I really support the Ukrainians and what they're doing.
Mm-hmm.
But I shouldn't, because they're going to war. No. Feel angry. Feel pride in what they're doing in defending their homeland. That's perfectly okay. Do what you can, as you're doing. But yeah, those feelings are perfectly valid too. And I think sometimes we get caught in that Buddhist cliche of we should approach the whole of the world and all that's going on in this very detached and idiotic light. No, it's not. Feel your anger, examine its roots, and work with it. Right. Good for you. Perfect. Okay, thanks everybody for your discussions today. I hope this has been somewhat helpful. And I appreciate everybody's contributions and comments. And we will go ahead and finish up on page 3 with the Bodhisattva vow, and page 4 with the 4 immeasurables. Creations are numberless. I will strive to free them. Delusions are inexhaustible. I will strive to transform them. Reality is boundless. I will strive to perceive it. The awakened way is unsurpassable. I will strive to embody it. May your thoughts, words, and actions be corrective and encompassing of the pragmatic Buddhist path. May you approach this week with deference and dignity. And may you spread your personal peace to all those you encounter. May all sentient beings have happiness in its causes. May all sentient beings be free of suffering in its causes. May all sentient beings not be separated from sorrowless bliss. May all sentient beings abide in equanimity, free of bias, attachment, and anger. Swaha. And yes, I'm going to change the phraseology of that fourth one. I don't like it. I never liked it. I don't think it should be. I don't think it should be free from bias, attachment, and anger. I think it should be untroubled.
Do you need Dave Buchanan to help you?
Yes, I know.
All day, reading the simplified version.
Thank you all. Have a good day.
Geneva, I wanted to mention every day this week on the news, it has made me angry because they show Ukraine